All right. Well, welcome everybody. I am Andi Friedman, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you to this house party on behalf of myself and my co-hosts. We have somewhere in the Zoom world here, Dave Horwich, fellow presenter Brian, and our personal PAC board chair Eileen Dordick. Thank you all for helping bring us all together for this important topic as we kick off Pride Month with a conversation about my two favorite topics, LGBTQ rights and abortion rights. So really thrilled to have you all here tonight. Before I introduce the panel and kick things off, I just wanted to first set the stage a little bit for what we're talking about here tonight, and hope folks will bring lots of questions later. But of course, we're talking about the intersection of LGBTQ rights and abortion rights, two issues that we are fighting for, two issues where we've seen progress in some ways and a lot of scary challenges in some other ways. Of course, I couldn't not mention the Supreme Court right now. Many of you, I hope are aware that the Supreme Court has taken a case, Jackson Women's Health v. Dobbs, a last clinic in Mississippi. It's a 15-week abortion ban, and the only reason the court has to take that case is to either further gut or overturn Roe v. Wade. So we all kind of saw the writing on the wall when they stole arguably 2 Supreme Court seats in the last term, and Trump got his pro-life majority that he promised to his supporters. And so we are now seeing what that means. And that means a lot for LGBTQ rights as well. There's a big case we're waiting on around foster care and whether organizations who do adoption foster care can discriminate against LGBT people. A whole host of our rights are really up in front of this court, and they have a 6-3 conservative majority that wants to impose their religious view on all of us. So there's a lot to fight for, a lot of work to do at the state level to pass the protections at the federal level, the Equality Act, the Women's Health Protection Act, and the EACH Act to repeal the Hyde Amendment. So a lot of work we all have to do. And happy to talk about that more later, but I wanted to dig into this topic, which is kind of really thinking about the intersection. And I think we think about our rights in terms of IVF and assisted reproductive technologies and how those are dependent on being able to control your body and make decisions about being a parent. And I apologize for the window light on me. I'll get to that in a minute. But I also want to talk about the fact that we need to make abortion accessible for all people, that people who identify of all genders need to access abortion care. Not everyone who accesses an abortion care identifies as a woman. We need to make sure that the clinics are welcoming. We need to think about the language that we use when we talk about people who have abortions, not just women. And so there's a lot of ways where we need to think about how abortion care is accessible to everyone who needs it, and everyone has the reproductive health care and the broad spectrum of care that they need. LGBTQ youth are more likely to have unintended pregnancies, and they're frequently going to be more likely to need to access abortion care. Do they have the supports they need? We'll be hearing more about that later. So a lot of really important topics here on the intersection of these issues. With that, I want to do a very brief, I could never give this panel the full intro that it needs, but I'm going to try to give you a brief one. We have Rep. Kelly Cassidy. Most importantly, she is my state rep. She also has some other things that are important that she does. She started her career, this is, I love this, as the legislative director for Chicago Now. So she's been with us from the very beginning. She's worked as an advocate and a professional on choice, equality, social justice, access to healthcare, childcare. Basically, if there was a good bill on REPA or otherwise, she was out there championing it. She was always one of the first names whenever we're doing abortion access, and frankly, helping us stop all the bad stuff. She's someone we truly depend on here at Personal PAC. So thrilled to have her with us to talk about this. She lives in Rogers Park with her spouse and 3 sons. We also have Brian Johnson. He's served as the CEO of Equality Illinois, the statewide LGBTQ civil rights org since 2016. As ED, he oversees not 1, not 2, but 3 organizations, the C3, the C4, and the PAC, which I understand all have separate boards. Bless you and God help you, Brian. He has an amazing background in education. This I didn't know. It was really interesting to read his bio, coming from Teach for America, where he taught 1st grade and then ran the LA Teach for America, also ran, I think it was the Larchmont schools, and Got a lot of really important work done there. So really important work on education and equity in education and making sure all youth are accessing care, accessing education and being treated equally in school. So it's good stuff. He lives with his husband, Toby, and their daughter, Josephine, in the Lincoln Square neighborhood. Margaret Croke was just elected as Illinois' representative to the 12th legislative district. Congratulations. Very excited to have you here and like your flag in the background. You've already got it down. She started her campaign to fight for women, small businesses, and the LGBTQ community. Before that, she was Deputy Chief of Staff for the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, served on J.B. Pritzker's, the governor's transition team, was a statewide outreach for women in that campaign. So also a lot of connections to our work, and currently lives in Old Town with her husband, Patrick, and her son, PJ, and her two dogs, Winston and Charlie. And my favorite part of your bio, rotating cohort of foster dogs through the Alive Rescue. Love the rescues. And last but certainly not least, we have Pamela Quintana. Pamela uses they, them pronouns and identifies as non-binary emotional laborer in Chicago. They enjoy being part of networks of care as a form of abolition. Mutual aid work revolves around baking delicious flan through, I'm going to say this slowly so you can all write it down, at flan 4, the number 4, mutual aid. Follow them on Instagram. And supporting survivors. They currently work with the Chicago Abortion Fund, coordinating logistics, financial, and emotional care with people seeking abortion access. Self-care rituals include cuddling their cat Lucas, who the panel had the pleasure to get to meet just before this, and making grocery store flower arrangements. Pamela, we're so thrilled to have you. Pamela's here in her personal capacity, not representing CAF, since this is a political event, but we can talk about all the amazing CAF work CAF does. And if you're looking for a space for your C3 in addition to your C4 that are going to Personal PAC, I am a monthly donor to CAF and I'm a big fan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rep Cassidy to talk about her experiences with the intersections of LGBTQ rights and reproductive rights and how it's all intertwined.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. You know, when I first came into the General Assembly, as at that point one of 3 LGBTQ members, several of my new colleagues, upon hearing that I was coming into the chamber, said, "But she has kids. What do you mean she's gay?" I was this anomaly to a lot of my colleagues who hadn't ever contemplated that people who are GLBTQ might actually have children either from a prior marriage or, maybe taking those steps within their marriage. So there was a big learning curve for a lot of my colleagues, and it continues because, the Family Institute has written about my mythical ex-husband, who, who I stole my children from. I mean, people make up all kinds of crazy things, but the truth is almost crazier, because when we started the work of starting our family, first of all, we started out using a known donor and had doctors who didn't really understand how that was going to work, who gave us a great deal of grief over that. But fundamentally, my OB-GYN told me, "You're going to have trouble getting pregnant, but you have to try for a year before we can do anything about it." And so we started doing supervised inseminations, which was ridiculous. And Margaret's going to talk about her bill later, and I talked about wasting 24 vials of sperm over the course of that year. Some of it was we ultimately had to give up on our known donor because I needed too much intervention. But the idea, quite frankly, during debate, I almost broke out into "every sperm is sacred" for the benefit of our Republican colleagues. But it would have been great. I wish I had thought of it just 10 seconds before. But we had to go through a lot of steps before I could even get the interventions we needed. Because that was just the first step of the journey. That was enough to convince the insurance industry that I needed fertility intervention. Then we started really blowing through the frozen sperm, and the meds and all of the things, and the constant monthly fight with the insurance company to ensure that it was covered, and literally having to send an affidavit from my doctor that she witnessed the inseminations at one point. I mean, it was just, it was an ugly mess. But at the same time, I felt incredibly fortunate to even have had the opportunity to jump through those hoops, because prior to passage of the Family Building Act, there was no required coverage for fertility treatment. So, at the time, it was that sort of, don't complain. This is as good as it's going to get, but we've moved through that. We've gotten, further down the road. Many of you, lots of personal PAC folks know that somewhere along that journey, I actually had to have an abortion as well, to preserve my life and my fertility. So I joke that the boys are the embodiment of full reproductive health care, because everything from fertility treatment to my abortion to getting the kind of birth that I wanted to now, as a woman of a certain age, having access to care for the symptoms of menopause, is what reproductive health care is. And I am so grateful that we passed the RHA that really sets that language into our statute that talks about people who get pregnant. And we can laugh now, but that 3.5-hour hearing where I was asked repeatedly, why is woman stricken from this? Anyone with a uterus can get pregnant. We did this back and over. It was like a terrible tennis match, for hours late into the night. But folks really are starting to get it, starting to understand, and we are driving that conversation in Illinois, so much more so than many other states. I think about the struggles that we've faced here in Illinois, and this year not actually getting to call the repeal of the Parental Notice of Abortion Act. But then I think about our colleagues around the country who operate in the minority, who are coming up against the 15-week abortion ban, the 6-week abortion ban, and I acknowledge our great good fortune. But that's because of organizations like Personal PAC that have been mission focused since that first job you mentioned, Andi, where I first met Terry Cosgrove, and the two of us started this battle together. Terry's mission focus has been a pro-choice majority, an unapologetic pro-choice majority. So we are incredibly fortunate. And honestly, as I hear and counsel friends along the way, and have, because we were kind of the beginning of the baby boom, about how to work around the insurance industry and how to, what language to use. And I'm really grateful that, we're not still depending on a hastily written and carefully crafted rule that allowed folks to get coverage. Now it's going to be part of our statutes. So it's, one more step forward.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And yes, big snaps to all of that. We're now moving to Brian.
Great, thank you. It's always tough to follow Kelly. I promised my networks that Kelly was going to curse, so I think that's going to happen in the Q&A. I just want to foreshadow that. I don't think I've been on a call or a meeting with Kelly without that. Thank you. I will start simply by saying there has been no person and no group in the state of Illinois more responsible for electing pro-equality legislators in the General Assembly more than Terry Cosgrove and Personal PAC. That is not hyperbole, that is fact. If we did not have Terry and Personal PAC, we would not have had such a strong pro-equality General Assembly in the state of Illinois. And I think what Terry sees, and what so many of us have lived, is that the fight for reproductive freedom and the fight for LGBTQ equality go hand in glove. I mean, if you think about how we got on a national level to the Supreme Court decision for marriage equality in Obergefell, we would not have gotten there if we did not have Griswold v. Connecticut in the 1960s, right? If we did not have Roe v. Wade in the 1970s, because at the core of both reproductive justice and LGBTQ equality is the fundamental belief that it is right and protected by our Constitution that people get to determine the structures of their most intimate relationships, and those relationships should be protected by law. Full stop. Full stop. Whether those relationships are parenting, whether those relationships are marriage, that is, the common seed to both of those. So we cannot have LGBTQ equality without full reproductive freedom, and we cannot have full reproductive freedom without LGBTQ equality. And that is why I am so grateful. I would say that, there are many, many people that I get to thank every day for having my family. And Terry Cosgrove and Personal PAC is absolutely at the top of that. And I think you see it from who's on the call, right? I mean, we have these super allies for LGBTQ equality, and they all happen to be on the Personal PAC board, right? You've got Dave Horwich, you've got Eileen Dordak, you've got Dee Bobian. Like, all of our allies who are supporting LGBTQ equality are disproportionately involved in the reproductive rights movement. There's been so many great things that have happened to advance both. And let me tell you one story that I think really, really captures kind of the intersection of both of these. Not to steal their thunder, but it's been out in public a lot recently. But I have a great friend and colleague named Miles Brady Davis, who is a transmasculine person married to a trans woman, who have a beautiful, beautiful daughter. But when Miles was 7 months pregnant, the doctor in the hospital said that they were going to have to be listed as the mother on the birth certificate, even though Miles identifies as transmasculine and his daughter's father. And that was because there was just this assumption that that's what had to be, that the birthing parent had to be listed as mother. And so Miles said this was not right. Talked to us, talked to Lambda Legal, talked to the Illinois Department of Public Health. And after lots of conversations, was able to update the policies and regulations around birth certificates. So now parents of kids on their birth certificates get to be gendered appropriately and identified appropriately on their birth certificate. The funny part about this is when Miles was telling me about this, and I said, Miles, that can't be true. I mean, Miles said, every, oh my gosh, why am I even talking? There's PJ. Miles said at that point, like, every parent on the birth certificate had to be listed as mother or father. And I was like, that is not true. And at that point, my daughter was about a year old. And they said, look at the birth certificate. And sure enough, I think this is why they give you birth certificates in the fog of new parenthood. I am listed, even today, on my daughter's birth certificate as Joey's mother, because that is how antiquated our systems have been. And we are constantly working to update them. And we're updating them because we're all collectively learning what it means as a society to be affirming of all types of families and to create rules that align with that. And I know Margaret in her first term has already had a huge, huge impact on this, and she will talk about it. But I can't stress enough about how the LGBTQ equality and reproductive freedom are two sides of the same coin. And I am so grateful that I get to live in a state that recognizes the validity of my marriage and the sanctity of my family because of the work of Terry Cosgrove and Personal PAC over the past 3 decades. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Yes, as you said, there's a very strong connection between the folks who support abortion rights and LGBT rights. And when Personal PAC does its thing, the boat lifts a lot of tides. A lot of our issues are supported. And your story just reminded me real quick that I had a similar thing with my second daughter, where the insurance company sends us a bill like a year plus after she's born for some, for her in nursery stay or something. And we're going, what is going on? This should have been covered by insurance. It was like thousands and thousands of dollars. And I kept calling and they were saying the insurance doesn't cover it. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And all of a sudden, I finally got a woman on the phone and I hear her like looking into it, and she stops. And I explained to me, I said, well, it was my wife's, was this and I'm this. And she all of a sudden, she paused and she goes, I know what happened here. I'm personally very upset about it and I will take care of it. And basically the insurance company had seen my wife's name, Julie, and had just assumed that she was the birthing parent and had gone to her insurance, which didn't cover it. And it took us a year and a half for someone to connect the dots and stop getting this bill. Because they had just whoever was, entering it in. So it's, and if we hadn't happened to get a supportive person on the phone working at the insurance company who put the dots, and I called it, back and forth, the hospital, the insurance company, the hospital, no one knew what was going on. So, yep, it is. There's still a lot to do.
I mean, the amount of times I have to sell it to a hospital or doctor's office, I'm not going to fill out a form because it is mother and fathered. We are learning. We are learning at warp speed.
Oh yeah, the old building the plane as we fly it. Josh is now 20. His original birth certificate listed me and none as father. And then when my ex adopted him, we got new birth certificates that say parent 1 and parent 2, which is very romantic and lovely. And we also had to instruct the insurance companies about the medical miracle of twins, because every other bill was rejected as a duplicate. So insurance companies are special.
And on that note,
to that point, yes,
change is happening, and we need good change happening in Springfield. So Margaret, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I actually had the privilege to kind of build off what Representative Cassidy kind of was the trailblazer for. I had a constituent reach out to me about a month after the primary, and his name was Dr. Zachary Marcus, and he told me that basically there were barriers that the insurance company were putting in front of him because him and his husband did not meet what we have defined as infertile. So that all the IVF treatments that go before that, any fertility treatments, they were not getting covered under their insurance. And I was really upset because he's a pediatrician, and stereotypically, of all the professions that you can have, be a parent, I thought pediatrician was definitely someone I thought should be a parent. PJ was 4 months old, and I was also going through postpartum. So I just remember hanging up the phone and crying because it just wasn't fair to me that you have someone who wants to be a parent so bad and they can't achieve that. And me, on the other hand, like, I'm a younger heterosexual woman who got pregnant, and why am I any better than anyone else to be a parent? Like, that's not fair. It's just not fair. So looked into the definition of infertility, and I got to work with a great group called Resolve, which is a federal organization around fertility and insurance coverage. And we identified that, to Representative Cassidy's point, there are workarounds, but the definition is basically you can biologically conceive and you have to have unprotected sex for 12 unprotected sex for 12 months. My Siri just
totally. I'm very confused by this. Wait, what? How does one conceive? We changed the definition to be obviously much more broad than that. So if you are still under 35 and you can biologically conceive and you are in a heterosexual relationship, you still have to try for 12 months having unprotected sex with your partner. However, if you are a single individual, if you are in a same-sex relationship, if you have a medical issue that your physician identifies and says that there's no way that you're going to get pregnant in 12 months, why the heck, I was going to curse, but I'm going to calm it back. Why the heck are you trying for 12 months? Because it's just a waste of time and a waste of money. You don't need to do that. And then also, if you're over 35 and you are a heterosexual woman, can biologically conceive, you only have to wait 6 months. So it's a much more broad definition, and it doesn't require the workarounds that were necessary before for people to get coverage if they need it and want to start a family. So it's been really fulfilling doing this work, because I have found so many of my friends kind of come out of the woodwork to tell me about their individual stories and their struggles that I was not aware of. And I think the more that we talk about it, the better it is. But we had no opposition to the bill. Blue Cross Blue Shield actually was supportive of the change. The only opposition was from the other side of the aisle. So that was, and as Representative Cassidy knows, who spoke for the bill, there's a lot of ignorance sometimes around this topic. And it was disappointing
to say the least, that it had to be such a partisan vote. But I'm happy that I guess it's on the governor's desk, and he should be signing it very soon. So immediate effective date.
Amazing. Thank you. And congrats on that accomplishment so quickly, right out of the gate. Look at that. Bodes well. Thank you. So I want to move to our final speaker, Pamela. I'm so thrilled you could join us here. I feel it's very important with any panel that I'm on. I want to make sure we're hearing the perspective of what's happening in terms of abortion access on the ground, the real experiences, because we know there's a lot of barriers there. And Pamela's both personal experience and working with the Chicago Abortion Fund, really seeing directly the challenges we're facing, even here in Illinois and certainly around Illinois. So Pamela, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pamela. I use they and them pronouns. And just for accessibility, I'm going to share a little bit about how I look and about my identity. I'm wearing a brown shirt with copper and black eyeliner. I have white skin, also politically identify as a non-binary woman of color. I'm second generation. I'm a co-parent. I'm disabled, neurodivergent, bi, and demisexual. I want to start off by thanking Personal PAC and Andi, my fellow panelists, and all of you for having me and for your efforts to advance reproductive freedom. And also I want to send a shout out to Megan, Jay, and everybody from CAF who's been so supportive and helping me speak about my experiences with reproductive justice. So thank you so much. And I also want to give a content warning for abortion, sexual violence, and oppression within medical contexts. And to get to the question of this evening, what is the state of reproductive freedom for queer people? When I think about this question, I like to ask myself, what is it like for young people to access abortion care? And every abortion story is different and barriers change all the time. And it's important to note that for young people, the barriers are amplified. My own experience with accessing abortion care was at a very young age. I was 17. And it was so isolating. I didn't tell anyone for many, many years. And even buying pregnancy tests at the time had to be done very discreetly within a certain window of time during the school day. And I had to conceal all of the evidence. When I did confirm the pregnancy, I didn't know what to do. No one had really ever talked to me about abortion as a medical procedure, that it's common or that it was an option for someone like me. I honestly couldn't conceptualize who got an abortion or in what context, under what circumstances, even though I believed in abortion and I was seeking it myself. My first course of action was to look into self-managed abortions through herbs. That was the only context in which I had heard anyone talk about abortions in a real way. And as a young person researching self-managed abortions online through herbs alone in 2009, in retrospect, is not the safest option. And that's not to discount people who do possess ancestral knowledge of how to use herbs for abortions. It's more about the lack of knowledge and support that I had that could have made it unsafe. And a lot of us have heard this narrative of abortion bans. If abortions are banned, the abortions will still continue to occur. They will just be more unsafe. And I ended up practicing self-managed abortion successfully, but also unknowingly. I was basically on a medication for arthritis that I didn't take very consistently, but I didn't know that you could not get pregnant if you're on that medication. So because I was not taking it consistently, I did get pregnant. And then when I took it again, then that ended the pregnancy. But I didn't really know how it ended. I just knew I wasn't pregnant anymore. And so, yeah, I only realized that like years later that like I put all that together. And at the end of the day, we go through these barriers and have to face them somehow, even when no one has advised us or supports us in our decisions. In states like Illinois, anyone 17 and younger has to go through what is called parental notification of abortion law, or PNA. And it requires that young people notify their parent or guardian of their abortion. Some of the ways to fulfill this requirement are to have your parent come with you the day of your appointment, or to have them submit a document to the clinic 48 hours before the appointment. I wasn't living in Illinois at the time, but if accessing a pregnancy test was something I had to do secretly, I can't imagine having to notify adults in my life about a pregnancy, and especially not an abortion. And for any young people who are in abusive living situations or who have experienced sexual violence by their guardian, this is a really unsafe requirement. And in order to bypass PNA, young people must access lawyers and speak to a judge who will consider allowing the young person to bypass PNA. Young people can consent to medical treatment even in situations after sexual assault, for example. But when seeking urgent, timely abortion care, the ability to consent is gatekept and stigmatized, making abortion inaccessible. And you can imagine what a young person might feel when they learn the reality of you have to notify your parent by law, or you need a lawyer to find an alternative, all while processing becoming pregnant, now wanting to be, being queer, being young, not having the money to pay for the abortion. To me, at the time of my experience, this all would have been insurmountable. And my second abortion was a year later at 18. It was during a time in my life when I was going through many transitions. I was attending community college in a different state from the one that I had been living in with my parents. And I actually moved back to Chicago after that. I was working part-time in retail, and I was responsible for all of my expenses for the first time in my life. And I was also experiencing intimate partner violence, and my pregnancy was not consensual for the first or the second time. And during this time, I was feeling unsupported by my community and people around me when it came to the violence I was experiencing. So when I found out about my pregnancy, it felt unsafe to ask anyone for support. I was too vulnerable already. And the day I found out, I was at the doctor. I didn't feel supported by my medical provider. They were the only person who knew. And I was at a loss. When I found out, I remember the doctor handed me some abortion pamphlets. And though I hadn't really said I wanted an abortion. And then she walked out of the room and my appointment was over. And so I needed to figure out the next steps on my own. And that was part of institutional processes I had to go through that really left me feeling like I was going through some kind of assembly line and just doing what someone else told me to do with little explanation. Though I did consent to the procedure, demystifying any medical process goes a long way for someone like me who is disabled, has experienced oppression within the medical healthcare institutions, and has experienced sexual violence and gender violence. To this day, at 30, I still experience these barriers, as well as being misgendered and being undertreated due to institutional barriers and cost. A lot of queer youth doing survival sex work or experiencing homelessness due to being queer and unsupported. Sorry, let me read that one. Let me go through that one again. For a lot of queer youth doing survival sex work or experiencing homelessness due to being queer and I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with that sentence. I think what I'm trying to say is a lot of queer youth experience homelessness and sometimes have to do survival sex work because they're unsupported. And I myself experienced insecure housing situation during the time that all of this was happening. And the barriers do compound and the barriers morph into other barriers. And facing so many obstacles and stigma can result in delayed access to care, which results in higher costs and even more legal barriers down the line. With my current work with CAF, my work involves supporting people accessing abortion care. We provide logistical, financial, and emotional support. In some cases, that means ensuring people have access to food when they travel, helping them navigate the city, translating and navigating other institutional barriers as they come up. And I recently worked with a young person who traveled hours to Chicago due to lack of clinics in their area who could perform their abortion, and they did live in Illinois, but they needed they needed to bypass PNA, and so we ended up connecting them to the ACLU, who helped them accomplish that. And we really did need multiple adults in full support of this young person in order to help them access abortion care successfully. Some great ways you can support are by being an adult who is committed to supporting any young person around you. You can be that person. Having conversations about abortion can go a long way. Donating to your local abortion fund is extremely important. There's so many expenses, and your donations can help someone pay for their abortion directly. For food, so they feel nourished the week of their procedure. For rides, so they don't have to walk long distances while experiencing physical pain from the procedure. Childcare, and supporting your local abortion fund is a form of mutual aid. So if you're able to, please visit chicagoabortionfund.org and donate. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you so much for such an important perspective and reminder of how much being what sometimes we can forget in Chicago or in our sort of progressive bubbles, how many barriers young people in particular can face when they're kicked out of their homes, lose the access to support, and all they have to go through, and how important it is to make sure they have access to all sorts of supports and care. And that includes reproductive health care. And Brian, I'm sure you could speak, much about, the issues that queer youth face, and the homelessness and sex work and other ways that young people have to survive. And how do we support them? So Pamela, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name earlier. So thank you all so much. This was really wonderful to hear from everyone. We have a little bit of time left for Q&A. Before I jump in, I'm happy to turn it over to our viewers. Is anyone either in the chat? Feel free to say something, or don't raise your hand because I can't see everybody, but either put something in the chat or take yourself off mute and speak up. Does anyone want to jump in with a question? Oh, Eileen Dordick, the chair of the Personal PAC board. Thrilled to have you on. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you all so much. You have such amazing perspectives. You've done such heavy lifting for the people of Illinois, and I'm really grateful for that, and grateful for your partnership. So this is a genuine and sincere question about PNA repeal, because I've talked to some of, particularly Rep. Cassidy and Rep. Croke, your colleagues, about what some of the barriers were to passing PNA this time. And Pamela, I really appreciate you articulating so clearly what makes it so hard for young people when they are pregnant and want to seek an abortion. And, one of the things that I have heard is, we have to make this narrative more appealing to the old school people who don't understand this issue as well, which comes in direct conflict with what, I'm also on the board of Equality Illinois, and I'm very thoughtful and try my best to gender people appropriately and use the language that's as inclusive as possible. And I'm struggling a little with where these two worlds interact. So I just love your input on that, what you think we need to do to get PNA repeal over the finish line. And, we're not going to solve that tonight, but I just appreciate your input on that.
I mean, I can jump in a little bit, both in terms of what's different right now, post, different this session versus when we, overcame really the very same objections in many ways to get the RHA on the board. In addition to RHA, we passed a lot of really progressive things, including some pretty significant criminal justice reforms. And this session was really marked by sort of it's going to sound a little, little oxymoronic, but a moderate uprising, where more conservative Democrats in particular kind of reached a point of not wanting to do any more. And this isn't the only bill that has gotten caught in that filter, for lack of a better term to use for it. But there is this, we started talking about criminal justice reform fatigue a couple of years ago, but it's really, I think, expanded beyond that into this frankly mistaken perception that these are things that can lose you a seat. The truth is, and Brian can speak directly to this as well, we didn't lose anybody over marriage. We didn't lose anybody over the RHA. The seats we lost this year were not because they voted for the RHA, but there is this sort of residual, and it's real easy to say, I'm gonna to bring the former speaker's name into this, but like, members were really conditioned to be worried about what the direct mail would look like against them and what they would hear at the doors on bills. And I think that there's just some of that residual fear, which is where you get that advice to change the narrative and get people comfortable talking about it. But we also really, much more so, and this is a place where organizations like Personal PAC can come in strongly, like, we also need to reset the lens. This isn't about being worried about what the direct mail is going to be as if you're a passive member of your district. This is about teaching us to be leaders on issues that matter. This is about bringing people along with us and finding ways to do that. And that's the narrative that needs to be changed. Not, oh, you're going to get some bad direct mail, and so you better walk an extra 20 precincts this week in order to make sure that people know that you're not a monster. No, how about we spend some time communicating in these districts about what a truly mainstream issue this is. Like I said, this isn't the only bill that got caught in that filter. We are traditionally a more conservative body as we head into a remap year in particular. Because people are going to be facing new areas that aren't as familiar with them. So it's not excusing it. It's kind of explaining the culture of the chamber and the chambers in terms of how they're looking towards what's coming next. And so, changing that dynamic, getting folks prepared to lead as opposed to respond, I think is critical.
And just to really quickly, oh, sorry.
I just would love to make a comment as somebody who knows the Springfield system because my husband was in it before he died for many years. It takes courage.
Love you, Dee.
Of your convictions and not caring a damn about a primary. That's what it takes. And I also know how the system works down there. So I'm going to put Brian on the spot and ask how the heck you got your bill called. And we didn't. I'm just kidding. But, it's like so many people are afraid to do what they believe in. And I am really tired of it. So there we are. I'll shut up now.
Dee Bobie and everybody, a true veteran to these issues. Thank you, Dee. Brian.
I wish you were my colleague, Dee. You should have won that seat.
Yes.
I got my butt kicked. So because of somebody who has now left the legislature, but you have another one that is just about as conservative.
Yep.
One thing I'll add, and I don't have answers to that, Eileen, because I think smarter people, both on this call and outside, would know the P&A issue. But I think it goes back to what Pamela was doing with their story. One of the reasons, and a lot of people don't talk about this, but I will talk about it for her, is one of the reasons we were able to be one of the few states and the last state to get marriage equality passed through the legislature is because of the amount of one-on-one conversations that Kelly had with her colleagues, just telling her story. There is not a single legislature in the entire country that passed marriage equality before Obergefell that didn't have openly gay members elected, representing their constituents, talking to their colleagues. We have been able to move moderate Republicans that we didn't think we could get on previous issues when we brought stakeholders to meet with them to tell them their story about how the bill would make an impact on their lives. So this is not a piece on PNA because I know that happened, but I just want to underscore for those of us that were really impacted when Pamela shared their story, that is such a critical part of success because it is through those individual, I always say in politics, people feel like courage is a vice, right? It's the riskiest thing you can have. I think what happens is when people want to be courageous and are looking for a raft to hold on to, it is the actual stories of real people who could benefit from legislation like Kelly and like Pamela that can make a difference. So I don't want to suggest that it's only about stories and that's it, but I know we need more Kellys and more Pamelas out there telling their story.
Brian, to that point, I think it was actually just this morning, Candace and I were talking about the boys, and I had this realization, the twins are 16. I was about to leave home at that point. And when I talk about, like, when we did the prep bill and I talked about not, being on my own from 16, and, when I've talked about it with regard to PNA, I didn't get pregnant. But for the grace of God, because I would not have been able to talk to anybody about it. And so it is really important that we humanize these abstract concepts for our colleagues, in particular, folks who are completely removed from a topic, right? They're, dude's a farmer. He's not thinking about this. He's thinking about farm policy. Dude's an insurance agent. He's there because he does insurance stuff, so pulling people into those stories is critical.
I just want to really quickly build off that because I think that with COVID, it's been a lot easier for people to avoid hearing stories or conversations on topics that they want to avoid. So we don't have people every single day down in Springfield confronting legislators to tell them about their experiences. We are opting into this panel tonight, and a lot of the conversations where we learn or are briefed on some of this legislation, it is because we have chosen to participate. And so you have a lot of people who are just deciding not to participate, so they're not hearing these stories. And maybe that's something that changes next year when we can have these conversations in person, and you can't avoid it. You've got to take it on head on, because for me, it's easy to frame. I used Planned Parenthood when I was a teenager. Didn't tell my parents. I didn't get an abortion, but I didn't feel comfortable telling my parents, who are liberal Democrats in Oak Park, Illinois. Come on. And then you have then at the same time, I've got a lot of colleagues who are fathers, and the first thing they tell me is well, if it was my daughter, it's you know what though? It's not your daughter. We're talking about all the daughters. So we gotta figure out how we tell those stories, and I think it's going to be easier once we're able to do it in person.
That's a great point. Thank you all. Yes, I think that if everyone had heard stories like Pamela's and the stories of the many youth who had to go through the judicial bypass and how cruel it is and unreasonable and just harmful, it would have been a really different conversation. So I'm glad we could have that here. Are there any other questions? I see a comment here. Carla saying, in the future, hope we can also look at adoption law around non-traditional families. I was the only parent on my son's birth certificate, yet Illinois forced me to involve my sperm donor for parental release so my husband could adopt my son. That is crazy. I don't know if any of the legislators know if that's something that's being discussed, or if that was, Margaret, if that's kind of related.
Carla, would you email me your story at repcassidy@gmail.com, please? We'll dive in, and if there's a statutory change, I promise you, Margaret and I will arm wrestle over lead sponsorship.
There you go. Look at this policy change happening on our. Anyone else have any requests they need? This is your chance.
I want to know who's got more Michelle Obama arms.
Not me. And Margaret's lifting that
I
baby
will
all the
always
time.
be
So
happy to be a chief co. Don't worry. I'll be very satisfied. So don't worry about that.
Oh, that would be great, Carla. We'll take it. 2023. It sounds like we have a candidacy being announced right now. My God, I'm making personal back history as we go. Bills are getting passed. Candidates are coming out. Are there
Andi,
any?
can I just say Carla was a great candidate. I'm gonna. I should never do this. I think it was the 86th district. And we would all be fortunate if Carla were able to join Rep Croke or Rep Cassidy in the General Assembly. So keep an eye out for Carla.
We're on it. Noted. Good stuff.
I have a question.
ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name's Megan. I have a question about the fertility bill that just passed. I also used, I had my twins via an IUI after a lot of back and forth with insurance companies. And I know I was really lucky when thinking about the experiences that close friends of mine have had and the navigations that they've had to do with their insurance companies around getting pregnant and the 12 months or the 6 months or whatever. So I'm really thankful for all of the work that's been done on this. And I'm curious about Medicaid coverage for people who are in that position and what kind of supports are available for people who are underinsured or who don't have insurance. I know so many of you on this call probably worked really hard on House Bill 40 and how transformational Medicaid coverage for abortion coverage has been here in Illinois. And I just like to hear thoughts about really making sure that all of the reproductive technology is available to everybody who wants to start or grow their family.
So really quickly, I'll just say something that I found really frustrating as going through this process with, any type of insurance mandate is that there are so many ways for companies or insurance providers to get around Illinois insurance mandates. So only 20%, essentially 20% of plans in the state of Illinois that individuals have are going to be have to cover this. What we were doing under HB 3709, so expanded fertility coverage, because you have a lot of plans that are physically located in another state if you have a large group health insurance, or you have a federally regulated insurance plan. So I did pass another bill. It's not a companion bill by any means, but with Senator Julie Morrison, where if you do have insurance through your business or you provide insurance, you have to provide a checklist to your employee that says what you cover in comparison to the state of Illinois. Because one of the other things I've found a lot is that people don't know what's in their insurance coverage, especially when it comes to fertility. So they start going through the process and then they find out that even though they thought the state of Illinois had this insurance mandate that required fertility coverage, their insurance coverage doesn't have it. Same with mental health too. It's essentially trying to eliminate the stigma that a lot of people go through when they go to their HR, they go to their employer and they ask, what do you cover? Because if I'm asking, I probably need it. But that's one thing trying to do to make it a little bit more clarification around what's in your plan. But yeah, the truth is that IVF, any fertility treatment is just incredibly expensive. I don't know how you can go about changing that and changing our healthcare system just in the state of Illinois. So that's kind of my answer to that. I know it's probably not as satisfying as you'd like it to be.
I do believe that Medicaid does cover underdiagnosed infertility. I believe I'd have to double check. But to Margaret's point, I've done a bunch of bills where so much of it falls under federal law. Insurance stuff generally tends to be pretty challenging in that regard.
Thank you for bringing that up, Megan. Sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done, and it has to happen at every level, not just in Illinois, right? We need it to be at the federal level too, to make sure that those loopholes are closed. And Megan didn't mention, but she's also the executive director of the Chicago Abortion Fund. So we're thrilled and honored to have her And thank you, Megan, for all the work you do to make sure there's access to abortion. All right, we have just a few minutes left. And yes, Eileen, the small print is terrible on infertility. Are there any last questions for our panelists?
Andi, could I just make one final plug and then go from there,
Please.
which is, I know particularly, coming up against a filing deadline for those of us who care so much about justice in our state and in our country, there are a lot of competing asks on our limited resources to advance justice. And it can be really, really hard to know what to give to and how to give, where to prioritize our giving. I will just say, and I hope you've gotten a glimpse of this tonight, that giving to Personal PAC is one of the best investments you can make for our state and for our future. Because every dollar you give to Personal PAC advances reproductive freedoms. It advances women's rights. It advances LGBTQ equality. It advances the rights of young people to be affirmed about who they are. And so I can honestly say, but for myself personally and for us as an institution at Equality Illinois, there are few places that you can give to that will have as broad an impact on as a significant group of people in Illinois as Personal PAC. So I just hope if you've given already tonight, Andi, I know you'll probably do a call to action. Andi will ask you to give, and then I'll say, could you just squeeze in a little bit more because the impact is that profound.
Well, now I don't need to, Brian. That was the best. This panel was the best. I'm just like gonna go get a drink and come back later when y'all are done. This is great. Yes, absolutely that. Thank you, Brian, and thank you. Grace has put a link in the chat. I will just say also, sometimes you think, oh, we're in Illinois. How bad can it be? They are coming for us, right? When Roe is gutted and abortion disappears all around us, and people are all traveling around the country to try to access care in Illinois, and also, self-managing with medication, which actually is a safe way to do it if you have access to the right information with medication abortion pills. But the antis they have the same map we have, right? They know which legislatures are going to ban abortion as soon as they can, and they know which ones are going to protect it. And they are going to turn all of their resources to Illinois. If you look at the map, we are the lone standing state in the Midwest, and they want to flip our chambers, and they're going to have a lot more resources to do it because they're not going to be worried about Mississippi or Kentucky or Arkansas. They're going to be spending all their money here trying to elect people who will overturn and take away abortion rights, and they will take away LGBTQ rights, and they will take away a lot of other rights that we're all depending on. As Brian said, it is a house of cards, and they're all built together. So the struggle is just gonna get harder to make sure that we continue to have access here in Illinois. It really is it is critical. And you'd think we have a pro-choice majority, but we've all been hearing tonight, we still couldn't get our priority bill even called for a vote to get rid of this terrible restriction that is harming young people here in Illinois. So there's a lot more work to be done, and everyone should also call if your state rep is not on this panel, call them and tell them they need to call this bill, and your senator, call them, make sure they know that you care about repealing parental notice for abortion and making sure that young people have all the support and care and access that they need. Pamela, please.
Just want to say again, thank you, everyone. And another thing, just real quick, that we also come up against a lot is people who do have insurance. First of all, it's really inaccessible. And then a lot of people who do have insurance, like the deductible is it makes it completely inaccessible. But even when they do have insurance and when the deductible is not a barrier, then the insurance simply won't cover. Like, even though they do cover like regular pregnancy care, they won't cover abortion for the majority of the people who are able to technically should receive that coverage. So yeah, just wanted to mention that. I guess is another one of those things to talk to your representatives about.
Absolutely. There's a lot of education and a lot of change still needed. And also just making sure everybody knows that Medicaid does cover abortion here in Illinois, so that people who have Medicaid can go to their provider and shouldn't have to pay for anything. So thank you, Pamela, for that. And thank you for sharing your story and your experience with us and reminding us of how much work there is still to be done. And thank you, Brian, for your leadership in the LGBT community and your support of Personal PAC, and of course, Margaret and Kelly, or Rep Croke and Rep Cassidy, as I should call you. Thank you for being our champions down there in Springfield and making sure this is all getting done. And yes, thank you all for spending the evening with us and for your support for Personal PAC and CAF. And we'll see you all at our virtual luncheon in October. Yes, I guess that's any last words, Eileen, as our chair, or anything else?
No, thank you all again so much for being with us. This is such an important issue, and talking about these intersections and helping our mutual goals, working together for them. So thank you all so much.
Have a great evening.
Thanks so much for
everyone.
having us.
Have a
Good
great
night, all.
Pride Month.